Hi, everyone. We're on the hour, so thank you for joining. I'm glad to see so many of you here. A lot of people who've come and rejoined us. This is the 10th in this current series of webinars, sponsored by Clinton HR, run by Want to Be Great Manager. I'm Clinton Wingrove, delighted to be spending the next hour with you, or up to an hour. So welcome back, friends from prior webinars, and welcome to new colleagues. We're glad to have you on board. This is going to be a whistle-top tour based on our experiences recently with clients, looking at how to handle the current situation. We're going to be picking up from some of the themes from the previous workshops and sharing with you some of our newest thinking. And my passion, as those of you who've returned know, is how do we get the best out of our people? How do we accelerate their development? As I often say, unleash their potential and you can transform their performance. So what are we going to cover today? Very briefly, what's different about now? We all know we're in a pandemic, we're all in a lockdown, but what's significant about that in the context of performance? What is it staff are actually looking for? And those of you who attended our Holding Others Accountable will remember we covered that in some detail. We're then going to look at what we mean by performance management. There's a lot of nonsense been talked in the past. We've seen some transformational changes over the last year, but let's go back and look at what that actually means. And then we're going to introduce the concept of 7-minute performance conversations, which has come out of our work with many of our clients, something that they've been requesting from us. So just to quickly summarize about what's different now, we've always known that managing performance is a challenge. We know that the vast majority of managers say that this is one of the biggest things they have to grapple with. And even some of our research showed that 50% of managers actually didn't even like managing people because of that problem. But things are quite different now. We've got a different environment, and particularly if we've got staff working remotely. We now know that we're seeing increased levels of anxiety and concern, particularly as in many countries, the concepts of furlough is coming to an end. We're seeing redundancies increase. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be much of an end in sight. We're also seeing this loss of identity. And again, there's a quote there from one of my executive colleagues who said he used to feel important, but now he just feels like a spot on the Zoom wallpaper. And we know that there are issues now with relationships. We're getting weaker relationships because of that virtual situation where people are not just connecting with each other and having that very personal contact. And then lastly, we're seeing this issue of anxiety coming from virtual meetings, feelings of isolation, etc. So feeling fatigued. All of those are affecting productivity. All of those are affecting how people feel. We put a lot of effort in organizations into well-being, but still the question is, how do we get that performance? And the question is, what is it that staff want? And what we're seeing is not different things, but a different balance. The mix of things that people are looking for is changing. So staff are very much now wanting clarity. Lots of companies that I'm speaking with are saying that their staff are constantly asking, so what exactly is expected of me? What am I supposed to be doing when I'm working at home? How much freedom and opportunity and flexibility do I have? They're also looking for assurance. They're not looking for false promises. They're not looking to be told everything is going to be wonderful. They're not stupid. We don't recruit stupid people. But they do want some assurance that the people who are running the company, the people at the top of the business, are actually looking after their best interests as much as they can. And in particular, they want recognition for their circumstance, what they're doing, and the effort that they are putting in. And that means they require us to demonstrate empathy. And those of you who are familiar with our quaternion profile of leadership and management will know that empathy, or demonstrating empathy, came out as one of the top 5 skills for people operating in a strategic role, especially if they have people management responsibility. So what we know is that in the current circumstances, even more than ever, This has always been the case, that despite what we hear about how organizations are operating now in holacracy arrangements, how if you empower staff, they will all do what they want. We still know that in the vast majority of organizations, what makes an organization sustainably successful is the caliber of their management and leadership. Those managers might empower their staff. Those managers might give their staff lots of freedom. But it's the caliber of the managers knowing when and how to do that that makes the ultimate difference. So working with a lot of our clients, they started asking us, so how do we cope with these challenges? We've got lots of people in managerial positions who don't find managing performance easy at the best of times. Now they're in a situation where many or not, if not most of those people are actually working remotely, and that's creating increased demands of them. So organizations started asking us, how do we handle that? They're struggling. They know that the company's got to recover its liquid assets. It's got to rebuild its funds. It's got to survive during this period, and surviving the exit might prove even more challenging than surviving the lockdown. And what we know is that organizational performance demands team performance, and we covered that on our last session, which was how do you create super teams in a virtual world? But now what we're worried about now is we need individual employee performance, and the role of the manager is key. But the question is, how do you do that in a remote environment? And the simple reality is, and it's something I've said for a long time, performance management simply isn't simple. Yeah, but it can be easy. Organizations have to put in place processes, forms, systems to have some oversight. So, of course, organizations have annual or periodic processes. Of course, they have forms and they have standard goal setting, etc. But the vast majority of intelligent managers understand that is not what gets the best out of their people. We now know from research that frequently goal setting processes are limited. We know that frequently incentive schemes do not produce a return on investment and have even been shown to produce negative outcomes. We know that performance appraisals of the traditional sort are universally hated by the people who deliver them and the people who receive them. So, but that doesn't mean to say organizations don't require some of those processes to demonstrate that they have some, at least, governance over the organization. But what we are increasingly seeing, and we started to see this before the crisis, but we're now seeing it even more, is that it's the frequent, brief, focused interactions that have the most significant impact. When we look at what brings out the best in people, frequently we see that this is the pattern: frequent, brief, focused interactions. And that was the seed corn for coming up with the concept of 7-minute performance conversations. But I want to take a very brief and a whistle-top tour through what performance and management is, because many of our attempts over the last 2 decades have oversimplified what is actually quite a complex process. And if we're going to manage people, we need to understand that. That doesn't mean to say our behavior and what we need to do is complex, but what we're faced with is complex. And from the research that I've conducted over nearly 40 years, specializing in this field, the one thing I've discovered is that in every organization, no matter how large or small, there are 7 components to performance management. And so long as we know what those 7 are, they give us a clue as to what it is we need to talk to people about. So very quickly, we'll go through these and then we'll move on to the core topic for today. The first one is setting direction. If we're going to have groups of people who autonomously, who particularly remotely, can make decisions about what they need to do this hour, this minute, this day, this week, they need to understand why. They have to have an understanding of the priorities. So somehow the direction is set. Now, in an organization that works really effectively, this becomes ingrained in the culture. In organizations that are more typical, it's encapsulated in things like the mission, why we're here, the vision, what our 4 to 5 year target is, our strategy, how we're going to go about it. Are we going to stack high, sell cheap? Are we going to produce quality products? Are we going to sell B2B, B2C, etc.? And then there's something about the values that constrain us, what we will not give up, even in the face of adversity. People know those. And even if you don't define those, they exist. Why? Because that's the essence of the culture of the organization. But those things enable people to understand the difference between what's important and what's urgent. And if you want optimum performance of your people working remotely without your direct influence, the more they understand the priorities, the more likely they are to be able to make intelligent decisions, identify what the best actions are, and more importantly, know when and if they should involve you or other people. So, rhetorical question. How consciously aware are your people? Do they really understand what the priorities are? Without your intervention, are they capable of working out the difference between important and urgent? Because if they are, great, you're part of the way towards managing their performance. If not, then you're at risk. The second step then is clarifying roles. One of the most common things I'm finding with managers who are talking to me about their staff is they say, by moving people from an office to a remote working environment, it's clear that their roles are changing. And absolutely, the way in which they now interact has to be different. If they were previously in the office, in the factory, on the shop floor, if they were actually face-to-face touching each other, don't underestimate how much that clarified, reminded them of their roles and encouraged them to act accordingly. The minute they move into a remote environment, you're now totally dependent on them for deciding what it is they have to do when, because they don't have those prompts and stimuli that they get from the environment around them. And many managers are significantly underestimating how important that is. So to what extent have you had a conversation with each of your staff, or have your managers had a conversation with each of their staff about how has the role actually changed? And in particular, the thing that's probably changed the most is where do they get the triggers and stimuli from to do the right things, and with whom should they now be proactively interacting when previously perhaps they were in a more reactive or responsive mode. So clarifying the roles is important. And again, you may have this clearly defined in job descriptions, but if you don't, your people will clarify their own role. They will make their own decisions about what matters, what they're supposed to do, and when they're supposed to do it. This clarity occurs whether or not you design it. The third step then is planning and aligning performance. And again, organizational processes need to be relatively simple because they have to be universally applicable. But we now know that traditional single element goal setting has limiting capacity. We know that many organizations have competency models which people are not consciously aware of. So the whole issue about how we plan and align performance is one which is one of the weakest that we have. We're going to come back to what we mean by performance in a minute, and how these very short, brief, frequent conversations can clarify that much more effectively than an annual process. Most annual processes these days exist in intense form, usually 2 months into the year when already 2 months performance has happened. And secondly, are often rarely looked at by the people for whom it's important, the people producing the performance. So we're going to look at that. The next element then is monitoring and measuring. And this is one where there's some intense activity going on, much of which I actually am not particularly in favor of. We now know that one of the fastest selling types of software is employee monitoring software. So much so that there are already rank lists, the top 20 employee monitoring software applications, many of them using artificial intelligence. They're monitoring productivity, keystrokes, access to websites. They're monitoring employee activity, often in the guise of being able to have oversight over security. What's interesting is, now that we've trusted people to work from home, we're employing more software to monitor their activity than typically most managers spent time on, monitoring what they're actually paid to do. So this is a really important area. Yeah, of course, as a manager, you need to understand what is being done and how it's being done, and by each of your people. But the question is, how do you do that? And what's your moral responsibility? If you've accepted the salary as a manager, you're responsible for understanding how you're optimizing the return on the company's resources, of which your people are the most important part. So do you have a means of knowing what they're doing and how they're doing it? And as I say, or are you in that category where you're falling back on the use of technology? And as I say, I have some reservations about the moral and ethical use of that, even though I'm fascinated by the technology itself. And then there's enabling, enhancing performance. Again, many of us have struggled. We've had at least 2 decades now where we focused on the issue of employee engagement. We've focused on the importance of winning the hearts and minds of our staff. We now have to win the hearts and minds of our staff when they're working remotely and they're experiencing all of the negative issues that we talked about before. And yes, organizations have invested heavily in wellness support, mindfulness, etc. But rhetorical question, what have you or what have your managers done on a personal level to ensure that the way they interact with their staff is bringing out the best of them? And that's not necessarily about being soft. I had a manager recently say to me, well, because my staff are all working remotely and these are difficult times, I'm really sort of, backing off and not making my demands felt. The one thing I've learned over the years is that employees respect managers who take their job seriously. I've found that some of the best managers in the eyes of employees have been managers who've been quite demanding. I don't mean negatively. They've been demanding in the sense they've been clear about the expectations. They've explained why they're important, and the staff trust them to make intelligent decisions and reward and recognize them appropriately. What I've found is frequently people who leave and cite issues with their manager, one of the things they cite is that their manager didn't seem to, have a grip on things, didn't seem to believe in good performance, was actually generally quite weak. And often their perception was that the manager was too weak with other people, not them. So that's a key issue. And then the issue of assessing and evaluating. We all know many of the classic problems with appraisals, and I've done lots of statistical analysis. I've analyzed data sets for companies, and I've managed on many occasions to show that appraisal data tells you more about the company and the appraisers than it does about the appraisees. And we have things like calibration meetings, which are supposed to bring the illusion of objectivity into the equation. One of the things we have to recognize is there's a fundamental difference between assessing performance and evaluating performance. And let me give you an example. Let's imagine I agreed a sales target with a salesperson called Chris. We've agreed that Chris is going to try and sell 8,000 units at a standard price. At the end of the year, Chris has sold 7,000 units at the standard price and 1,000 units at 25% discount. The question is, what's the assessment? And of course, the answer literally is, did not meet expectations. Chris has failed to achieve the standard price on 1,000 of the units that Chris has sold. But what's the evaluation? If we're being fair with Chris, how should we evaluate that performance? Is did not meet expectations fair? And most people would argue, well, doesn't it depend? And that's exactly the point. Yes, it does depend. So let's imagine that in Chris's situation, I tell you that a new competitor had suddenly entered the market during Q3 with a similar product, but at 2/3 of the price. And Chris responded immediately by getting marketing to do some local comparative marketing, negotiated a price discount for our small to mid-range customers to keep them on board. while securing all of our larger customers by meeting with them one-on-one and holding quality comparison workshops with them to show the value of our product. How would you evaluate Chris then? The answer is you'd probably say Chris had exceeded expectations. So as a manager, we have to be able to understand that nuance. If we don't, then we are viewed as being as trivial as the process we've implemented. And then the issue of rewarding and recognizing. As managers, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to implement our organization's reward policies. And that doesn't only mean we should implement them, we should actually support them. And I get really frustrated when managers say things to staff like, well, I would have given you X, but I have to apply the policy. No, you wouldn't have given them X because you are a manager. You accepted the accountability for implementing the corporate policy, part of which is supporting it. But that doesn't mean to say as a manager, you can't do lots of other things, which we now know have far more of an impact on performance, which is things around recognition. So yes, you have accountability for implementing the reward policy, but you also have a responsibility for recognition and the things that you do that will actually inspire people and bring out the best of them. That was a quick whistle-top tour. Normally, we'd spend a lot more on each of those and equip managers with the skills they need to affect each of them. But let's come back to the critical thing, because every one of those can actually be reinforced and improved by what we want to cover today. And that is, performance management simply isn't simple. That's what I've hopefully just managed to explain. But it can be easy, because what we know is frequent, brief, focused interactions can have a dramatic effect in each and every one of those 7 cases, bringing alive the direction the organization wants to go in. For example, clarifying a measurement or discussing how we're going to monitor something around recognition. Every one of those, as a manager, you can contribute to. And what we've got to stop believing is that 1 hour formal interviews, even more frequent formal interviews where we cover a range of topics will work. We now know in a virtual world, attention spans are dramatically reduced. You are very, very lucky, if you keep someone's attention for very long, even on a video conference or on a video call. We know that the emotional disconnect, the cognitive disconnect, and the attention spans drop so far. You're lucky. If you cover 3 topics, you're lucky if they remember the first and the last. If you cover 6 topics, you're even luckier if they remember the first and the last. So what we've got to do is to focus. So our recommendation for 7-minute performance conversations, first of all, is for every individual, you should be consciously aware you're the manager, you're accountable for them, or your managers are accountable for them. So every manager should, in their own mind, have a really clear idea with each of their staff, which of those 7 aspects of performance management is the one that I need to polish, the one I need to lift? Does this employee get what the priorities are? Or is it that they're not clear about one of the specific expectations? Or is it that I need to give them some recognition? So the first thing is, rhetorical question, could you make a list of your staff now and make a list, and against each name, identify what's the next priority the next time you have an interaction with them? What's the one topic you need to cover? So the first thing is focus. The second thing is, we often then go into conversations and we talk at people. The number of times I experience managers ringing up their staff because they want to talk to them. You're going to get far more engagement, you're going to get far more attention, and you're going to learn a lot more if your initial interaction with them is asking them questions. And I've had managers say, well, what if I'm talking to them about a performance issue I need to correct? Well, wouldn't it be useful to understand from them whether they think it needs correcting? Wouldn't it be useful to understand why they're performing the way they are? Wouldn't it be useful to understand if there's something happening that's inhibiting that performance? You're not going to uncover any of that if you start talking at them and push them into the fight or flight syndrome. So our recommendation is identify a focus, start your conversation with that. So perhaps, Chris, I'd like to have a conversation with you about the achievements against that sales target. Chris, I'd like to talk to you about how did you interact with the clients when the competitor appeared? So start with why are you talking to them? And then say, so I'd like to ask you a few questions. And one or two good quality questions will reveal a significant amount of information. And understanding how to ask questions that build understanding is really important, and listening to the answer. We frequently get into conversations, a huge amount of which add no value at all. Ask clear, crisp, focused questions and listen to the answers. And then at various points, yes, provide input. So if you're discussing setting direction, provide input to help them understand the priorities and why we do what we are. If your conversation is about measurement, provide some input on how you perceive their performance. What evidence have you collected? If you're talking to them about recognition, provide input. What was it you saw? Why did you like it? And what, therefore, would you like them to do in the future? But wait until you've got an understanding with them about the topic in hand. And then it's important we agree. I experienced lots and lots of situations where managers have had quite long conversations with people and believe they've reached an agreement. An agreement, you say, well, yes, we had the conversation, and at the end I said, do you agree? And they said yes. If you ask someone, do you agree? If you ask someone, do you understand? If you ask someone, is that clear? And the response you get is yes, you've learned absolutely nothing. Zero, zilch, nada. All you've learned is, well, you have learned one thing, and that is they think they know, they think they understand, they think it's clear. So in order to make sure, if you're talking about performance, any of those 7 components, if you're talking to employees about performance and you want to understand if they've agreed or not, ask them to tell you. Ask them to tell you. So what have you learned from this? Yeah. What have we agreed? Yeah. What are you going to do? And then the last one is, if you're going to influence performance, you presumably are wanting some action. Now, if what you've done is you've given them recognition, pat on the back, your commitment, hopefully, is that they're going to carry on doing it. But if, however, you've had a performance conversation which is about correcting a level of performance, you want explicit confirmation that they're going to correct it, and not that they're just going to improve. How are they going to improve? What are they going to do to improve, and when? And again, you need to get them to say it. And that's why we say it's a 7-minute performance conversation. It's not a 7-minute performance lecture. So this principle of having that two-way dialogue is important. So 5 steps, a structure. For every employee, when you have these conversations, have a single topic, not multiples, one at a time. If you've got 2 topics to cover, have 2 separate conversations. Start by asking questions to get into attention and engagement. Ask questions that improve your relative understanding, and listen attentively to the answers. And then provide input that's going to improve. And that comes back to understanding what motivates people, etc., which we'll come on to. Always make sure you reach an agreement, and you only know if you've reached an agreement when they tell you what you believe they've agreed. And likewise, make sure you secure a commitment. Well, the question then is, so what sort of style perhaps should I adopt? And again, going back, let's think about what we said people are looking for. What we said people are looking for is they're looking for clarity. Yeah, they're looking for assurance. They're looking for recognition. They're looking for empathy. So we'll come back in a minute and go, how do we achieve that? But let's pick the first one first, clarity. What is it we should talk about? And what, again, we suggest is the 7 typical topics. So 7 aspects of focus. And they link broadly to what we've covered under performance management. But the first one, and the most important, we believe, is engagement. Yeah. You need to make sure that sufficiently frequently you are tapping into your people. How engaged are they? Yeah. How are they feeling? What's their mental health? Yeah. So this might start off with, I'd like to just spend a few minutes chatting with you about how things are. How are you feeling? How's it going? Yeah. And then again, ask a question. Tell me, how are you feeling at the moment? Not, you should be feeling this. We've got all these schemes. I'm going to offer you this. You should be good at home, blah, blah, blah. Ask the question and let them answer. So engagement and wellness, we recommend, is one that should be high on your list. Probably checking in with your people. And again, depending on the individual, more or less frequently. But be careful not to become complacent. Just because someone is quiet and doing the work does not necessarily mean that they're in a good place. The second one is priorities. It's absolutely critical if your people are working remotely, especially if you subscribe or your organization subscribes to the concept of empowered, self-managed teams, intelligent people knowing what to do. The more you allow people to operate independently or autonomously, as Dan Pink cites it, the more important it is they understand the priorities. And that comes back to this issue of vision, mission, strategy, and values. I don't care what you call those, but it's important that people understand why we are doing things, what the relative priorities are, because they're changing. So in many organizations, survival now is the relative priority, minimizing cash burning. For other organizations, it's customer retention. For other organizations, it's seizing the opportunity to get an edge in the marketplace. Do your people understand what the priority is in terms that relate to their work? If they do, it's much more likely that in your absence, in the absence of any interaction, they will make great decisions about how to spend their time, what to do and what to do first, what to do best, where to cut corners, etc. So priority is absolutely critical. And again, you can start with a question. I'd like to chat to you about the relative priorities. Chris, in the coming week, where do you feel you should be spending most of your time? The answer will be insightful. You will learn. Do they understand the priorities? And how do they see those applying to their work? And just by asking the question, you've brought that uppermost in their mind. You're going to improve the quality of their management of their to-do list. Yeah. The third one then is performance expectations. And this is a really interesting one because, again, organizations have to have simple processes. So people have to have 5 to 7 objectives. Yeah, and we'll bring in an Olympic athlete to tell people how important goal setting is. I've never yet met an Olympic athlete who's got their gold medal because somebody told them to jump an inch higher. Yeah, it's complete nonsense. They get the gold medal because a coach sits down with them remorselessly every day, 8 hours a day, discussing how they do things and looking for minuscule refinements to how they go about things. And they spend hours and hours trying to improve their technique and their skill. So performance is not just about what people produce. It's also about how they go about things, and it's about their development. And we need, therefore, to be sure that each of our people understands those 3 and the relative significance of them. If you're the head of sales, you're up at the top of the chart. There's a lot of what. Most of your job is about sales and revenue and margin. If you're a receptionist, most of your job is about how and developing your skill at interacting with clients, learning the smile, learning the right words, learning how to get them through reception quickly. So each of your people needs to understand the three things. Excellent performance in any job has a combination of the three. What we are seeing, interestingly, is we're seeing a shift from the more conventional pattern, which was that one, where the further up the organization you went, the what became much more important and the how and the growth became less. We're now seeing that actually development at the senior strategic level is of paramount importance. Management development has probably never been in greater demand than it is now. And it's ironic when most of the HR press is talking about holacracy, self-managed teams. The evidence on the ground is that for the vast majority of organizations, the quality of management is critically important, because through quality management, we can help every individual understand the mix of what's expected of them. What's expected of them in terms of output? What do we expect them to produce when we drop off the Zoom call, when we drop off the Teams meeting or whatever platform we use? What's expected of them throughout the day, however they choose to allocate their hours to personal life and work? We also, though, need to be aware of how they go about things. Working remotely, it's more important that we have conversations with them about how than it was when they were in the office, on the factory floor or whatever, where we could see them. Now we've got to discover that remotely. And it's more important now that we develop. Why? Because coming out, we've got to optimize performance. We've got to break this 10 to 12 year stagnation that we've experienced. We've got to find ways to improve productivity, but not at the expense of mental health and wellness. As managers, we've got to equip our people to learn how to be productive without putting in extra effort. This should be working smarter, not harder, that whole issue that we've had before. And then in terms of what we want people to do, we want clarity. And people have often argued, well, you can make it incredibly clear. What we made clear to Chris was he needed to sell 8,000 at standard price, going back to my sales example. That wasn't as clear as at face value it appears, because with most of the things we ask our people to do, there is a range of performance. And the problem is that with classic goal setting, we tend to set the goal closer to the minimum that's required. Why? Because we don't want, as a manager, to put ourselves in a situation where we're going to have to tell people they failed, and people don't want to agree to a single figure any higher than they can get away with. And yet the reality is, in the most aspects of performance, there is a range. There's a target we want people to aspire to, but we know the probability isn't that they'll not get there. Every Olympic athlete has a goal they're aiming at, which is beyond what they know they can achieve. It's a bit like JF Kennedy saying we're going to put a man on the moon when it was technically impossible to do it. Yeah. But what then happens is, there is a standard. There is something you expect. This is what we expect to happen, which is typically where you would consider your evaluation has worked. But there's obviously some minimum below which we're going to have one of those serious conversations. So you need to be aware, if you've got some critical aspects of performance, make sure people have an intelligent understanding of what the range is within which they're expected. Be brave and encourage them to go for that target and aspirational, but give them, remember, clarity around those things, but the assurance that they're not going to be punished if they miss something that they've really strived to achieve, because otherwise you'll then end up with that challenge of fairness and demotivation. The next topic then that you might choose, again, one at a time. You'd only speak to people about one of these at a time. The next one we recommend is measures and evidence. One of the things we know is that a good indicator of potential is people's self-awareness. And we now know psychologically, of course, the more self-aware you are, the clearer you are about where you can improve and how you can improve. So we know that self-awareness is critically important. And again, as managers, we have a horrible habit of monitoring performance, and the measures we talk to people about are the ones that we know, and typically the ones where we know they fall short. What we need to be doing is encouraging our employees to know themselves where their performance is, how it compares to standard. We need our employees to understand the importance of having a measure. What is it they say? If you don't have a long-term objective, any route will get you there. Well, the other quote that goes with that is, if you don't know where you are, you're lost. So we need to make sure that our employees are not lost. You can address a lot of anxiety if employees understand clearly how their performance is perceived. The second most common complaint that employees make in exit interviews is that they never knew quite where they stood. But don't do this by telling them. Do it by asking them. So again, focus. My focus is with this employee. I want to talk about measures. How are we doing compared to plan? So then we ask questions. Yeah, on Project X. Yeah, tell me, where are we against the plan? Yeah, Chris, talk to me about where you are in terms of sales achievement, sales pipeline, etc. And by listening to the answers, you'll learn a number of things. Does the employee understand the measures of what they do? Because if not, you'll get lots of vague answers like, well, I think I'm doing really well. I think things are going okay. Yeah, no problems. If you've got an employee who really understands, they say, well, actually, on 7 out of the 10 activities, we're on target. On one activity, we're ahead. There's 2 activities where at the moment we're 2 days behind, but I've put a plan in place. I think I can catch up by Wednesday. So by asking questions, you learn, is this employee aware of the measures of their performance? And if so, are they aware of how they compare to them? If they don't, what's your input? You clarify. Yeah. So again, it's that focus, question, learn, input. Then the question is agreement. So we're agreed then, Chris, that you're currently falling a bit behind, but clearly you've taken some action that I'm pleased with to compensate. Chris, what is it exactly you're going to do to see if you can recover, to see if you can get us back to that 8,000 sales? That's where you ask for the commitment. The fifth one then is recognition and positive reinforcement. There's a concept that says, let's give people constructive feedback. I think I mentioned on not the last webinar, we ran the one before. I've never been given constructive feedback and felt good as a result. Now, I'm sure some of you may be more if you like, thoughtful than me then, who have. But that's my experience. But a lot of research I did with someone called Dr. Paul Marciano when we wrote a book called Super Teams, which we partly based the last webinar on. What we found was that in teams that really excelled, there was a very, very positive atmosphere. Everybody, when they left work, felt respected. And one of the things that typically led to that was what we called supportive feedback, positive feedback. And it's really important that we have frequent conversations with our staff, recognizing and reinforcing what they're doing well. The vast majority of your staff are spending a lot of their time doing good things and doing them well. If not, why aren't you in a much more serious conversation than the ones we're talking about here? So what we need to make sure is that we do frequently have short, brief, serious conversations with people about the things they're doing well, giving them positive reinforcement and recognition. But even if they need to improve, we can still give feedback positively. So let's imagine we've got someone where we believe they can improve. Perhaps Chris can improve on his sales technique. So we might ask Chris some questions. So Chris, How have you recently been approaching this with the smaller clients, the ones that seem to be tempted by this competitor and their cheaper pricing? So Chris gives you an answer. So the next question might be, okay, what different ways could you possibly handle that then, Chris? Yeah, now Chris may come up with some answers, in which case reinforce them if they're good and encourage them to go away and do that. If he doesn't come up with them and you've got an answer, so you might say, well, why don't you go in and offer, that if they lift their volume, then actually they'll automatically get the pricing discount. Why don't you try that next week, Chris, to see if that will go? So rather than saying to Chris, why didn't you last week suggest that they place bigger orders which will attract a discount that gets you close to the pricing? That's a criticism. Chris can't change what Chris did last week. What Chris can change is what Chris does next week. So positive feed forward works extremely well. The sixth topic is performance correction. And clearly performance corrections are important. We strongly recommend a structured approach. You need to have some evidence to back it up. But again, start with, I want to talk to you about X, which is the topic, perhaps, the performance you want to talk about. So make the conversation clear. That's what we are going to talk about. But again, always start out with why. Start out with questions, asking them their situation. When you get to the point where you're providing input, there are lots of recommended structures for delivering performance correction details. Yeah, often referred to, for example, as itemized feedback, which is one of the methods that's used. So you might say something like, yeah, what I've observed is, that leads me to think the following. What I feel you need to do is this. Therefore, in the future, in situations like this, this is what I want you to do. Are you able to commit to that? And if they say yes, say, okay, so can you run past me then? If this happens in the future, what are you going to do? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, do I have your commitment you are going to do that? Yes. So again, we cover a variety of techniques for handling those performance corrections. But again, they can all be achieved well within 7 minutes if they are well structured and well planned. And then the last one of the 7, we believe, is performance blockers. One of the things that managers can do that lots of other people can't do is we have the authority and the ability to remove performance blockers. The important thing is to find out what they are. And again, our structure works really well for that. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes. There's no other topics I want to cover today, but I'd like to just chat. What sort of things are there that might be inhibiting you from doing better? And what you'll frequently find is people will give you things. They'll say, well, if we did this, if we did that, if we did this. Many of those, you can show them how to unblock them anyway. Often it's a lack of knowledge, lack of expertise or whatever. But occasionally you'll find that something pops up. And if you're having frequent, brief, focused conversations with all of your staff, you will start to pick up patterns. So deliberately making sure that you have at least one of these conversations within, let's say, every 2-week period with every one of your staff, you'll be surprised what things actually come out from those. So then the question is, a lot of people say, well, how do I start the conversations? So let's imagine I take that on board. So I'm going to have these very brief, frequent, focused conversations, going to limit it to 7 minutes max. I'm going to pick a topic before the conversation starts, and I'm going to choose those based on each employee. But how do I start them? And the answer is, of course, one of the simplest ways is you pick up the phone and ring them, or you send them a Zoom or a Teams or whatever platform you use, Blue Jeans or the other many platforms, to have a video conference. But probably the most common one, which we recommend, is you pivot. You're having conversations anyway. You might have just finished a meeting and you say, Jack, could you just hang on at the end? Just something I wanted to have a quick chat with you. Chris, can you give me half an hour and then perhaps we'll get back together? And then what you do is you just pivot from one topic to another. And I've seen some fabulous examples. Perhaps you've been chatting to one of your staff about watching the soccer match last night and how amazing it was that someone scored a goal. Yeah. And how that's, put them in the upper league. Well, talking about putting people in the upper league, Chris, how do we reckon we can get this extra 1,000 sales? Yeah. Or, you've been chatting to someone about a project. You say, well, okay, great, we finished that. Can we just spend a few minutes now on? Yeah. Or you've been talking about how they've been handling a particular piece of work. You might say, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Could we spend a couple of minutes talking about how you interacted with the people on that project? Because you've decided that there's something about how they're doing things that's of interest. Or now that we've caught up, can we just spend a couple of minutes on something else? So pivoting, yeah. What happens then is over a period of time, two things occur. One is these conversations lose that heavy formality, which puts people on their back foot, stops them listening, and makes them more defensive. Secondly, it becomes natural. They start to expect, it starts to become part of your brand. Whenever a conversation takes place, there is an element in it about performance. And that's a good thing. That is the job. That's why we're there. So going back to what do they need? What they need, clarity, assurance, recognition, and empathy. What we believe is that by structuring these short conversations and having lots of them in a very clear way with a clear focus, starting by giving them credit for their intelligence, we ask them questions first, then providing input or added value, reaching an agreement and getting a commitment, which makes it serious. That establishes clarity in their minds about what matters, what's important. Secondly, it offers some assurance. They now know what it is expected of them, and they know how they're perceived. It also, if you stick rigidly to using the 7, a number of them provide recognition. It ensures that you have some conversations with them that make them feel positive. You give them ideas, you give them recognition for their effort, for their skill, etc. And most of all, repetitively starting with asking them questions demonstrates some empathy. And particularly if you make sure that you include, in every 7, at least one that focuses on engagement and wellness, you've demonstrated empathy, which is another one of the top 5 skills of strategically successful leaders. So we hope that that's been informative. It's a whistle-stop coverage. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If any of you want to email me with any questions, I'll be more than happy to engage with you and answer them. I'm the only Clinton Wingrove out on LinkedIn. Thank you, Mum. So if any of you want to connect there, we will be, after today, we will be emailing you, unless you in the chat box advise that you don't want us to. We will be emailing you a copy of the slide deck. We'll also be informing you of our next webinar, the details of which will be there. Our next webinar is on the 30th of October at 2 p.m. Again, it's Friday at 2 p.m., 30th of October. And we're focusing very specifically on curing the scourge of ineffective and dreadful meetings. So we've called it Making Virtual Meetings Matter. Addressing the scourge of ineffective meetings. So that's on the 30th of October, our next webinar. For those of you who've attended, we are offering our usual special offer of some free masterclasses for your staff. I've shown those on the screen. They will also appear, obviously, in the slide deck that we will send you. So thank you everyone for attending. Again, for those of you who are new, delighted to have you join our little family. We have these monthly get-togethers. I say a real whistle-stop tour today. We've covered 5 or 6 major topics. Hopefully we've given you some food for thought. Think about this concept of 7-minute performance management or 7-minute performance conversations. If you want any more information, email us. We'll be delighted to pick up discussions with you. Thank you, everyone. Please stay safe. Please stay well. And I look forward to seeing you on the 30th of October. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Victoria. Appreciate that comment. Very kind. Yes, Jesse, we will be sharing the slides for you. Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks, Kathy. Kathy, I saw you logged in really early. Thank you for that. That was great. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Victoria. Yes, the question has been asked, is the session recorded? The answer is yes, the session will be recorded. And again, we will make that available to you all. Thanks, everyone. We're signing off now. We'll look forward to seeing you on the 30th of October.